primary ignition.
I'm just not the hero type, clearly.
What a piece of junk.
Enterprise, this is the captain.
I got a bad feeling about this.
It's all part of the plan.
Engage.
Welcome back to Podcast 2 for 1. I'm your host, Donovan Thompson, with my co-host,
Daniel Wingfield.
In today's episode 224 of Podcast 2 for 1, youtube.com/@2for1 studios is the best place to consume all the content. If you didn't know, listeners, let's be honest, you probably did not. We are sponsored by Kapow Comics, located at 4047 East Kill Avenue in Sherwood, Arkansas. There they have comic books, collectibles, graphic novels, and of course, special guest appearances throughout the year.
Kapow.
Wow.
Kapow. And if you didn't know, listeners, and you would only know this if you were on the YouTube channel or you have a very keen ear attached to your body, we are greeted by the one and only Dr. Bruce Hutchinson.
It is great to be back, as always, now for our regular Christmas episode, or becoming regular Christmas episode.
It is. Yeah.
Last year was Home Alone.
What was?
Yeah.
The year before that was
Die Hard.
Die Hard.
Maybe. Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
Yeah.
I do like that you consider this a Christmas movie, because I was wondering, like, what's the requirements for this one? And about 2 minutes in, we saw a Christmas tree. I said, "Oh yeah, okay,
Yeah.
Christmas movie,
Yeah.
perfect."
Well,
So
when I suggested this movie, I didn't realize you guys would just jump on it so fast. I thought maybe you'd go with one of the other suggestions we had floating around, but you were all over it, and I was like, okay, we'll do it.
You know,
Oh, yeah.
it's a Kubrick I hadn't seen. You know, to
Yeah.
me, it's like I got to check this off my list in a way
Yeah.
of like things I should see as a filmmaker kind of thing.
yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. Is there an Eyes Wide Shut poster in the UCA like hallway? Or am I thinking
Somewhere, I don't know if it's still up, but there has been an Eyes Wide Shut poster up.
Okay.
Yeah, yes.
Okay, I did curate a lot of those in that one specific room because I got tired of looking at the walls, but I thought maybe it was one of them. I couldn't remember, but yeah, no. So it's a Tom Cruise film, which I'm a huge Tom Cruise fan, and then also, of course, like you said, Stanley Kubrick. And I had seen, snippets of shots of the movie before, and I'd heard a lot about it, and I'd even heard some of the behind the scenes stuff, just between like how he directed them and some of the things he did to kind of get them where they need to go. But I didn't really know anything about the plot, nothing. And I honestly thought it was more of a Nicole Kidman movie than a Tom Cruise film. And then I started watching the movie, and as it kept going, I was like, oh, it's really just really following him.
Yeah.
And so I'm really curious to see what you guys thought, and then I'll give my thoughts as well. So I want to start with Daniel here. Daniel, what do you think about Eyes Wide Shut?
Man, what a fascinating movie. Honestly, like it's kind of like a fever dream to me, to a degree, of like the events of this movie and like what Tom Cruise goes through. I really like the kind of the ideas the movie is playing with. Like I was like a 20-minute scene with Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise just having that argument while she's high. I loved that. Like I was realizing, like, this is a long scene with just two people talking in a bedroom, but I really enjoyed just like the ideas that it was playing with. And then Tom Cruise goes on this wild adventure where he's flashing his doctor license like a
a
cop.
badge.
Yes.
100%.
And women are throwing themselves at him everywhere he goes. It's like anywhere he goes, there's an opportunity for sex. And then the whole cult thing is really interesting. It almost feels like a little bit of a misdirection, right? That like it's more sinister than it actually ends up being. And the way that they just kind of explain it all again in a conversation with, I guess it's Sidney Pollack character.
Victor.
It's really it's really interesting, but it's not typical, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And it felt more like an art film than it did like a classical Hollywood film, for sure.
For sure.
That's what
Yeah,
I'm
I watched it last night, like late last night, and I'd sent Daniel a text yesterday morning-ish, and I was like, holy shit, this thing is like 2 hours and 49 minutes or 39 or something. And then, but as I was watching it, I mean, I felt it went by super fast. I don't know why, but it just went by really quickly for me. And I was like, and I was writing down time codes for like, this scene is this long. And I was like, man, that was like a 10-15 minute long dialogue like scene right there. But still,
Yeah.
for me at least, I never felt that way. And part of that maybe because there's my affinity for old school 80s, 90s, 2000s movies where that I haven't
Yeah.
seen before, and so I'm just automatically in because I don't, there's tons I haven't seen, but still it's a treat for me when I find one that it's well regarded and that I haven't seen before. So, but overall, I really enjoyed it. Um, I'm not sure I'll ever watch it again, but I like going on this journey of just sex and intrigue and just and jealousy and lust and all those kind of things and I almost wanted to call it I Blue Balls the movie, that's kind of how I felt a lot of the time. I was just kind of like, oh, we're never actually getting anywhere here. But yeah, I enjoyed watching overall, and I'm curious to what you guys think. I really watched it for the first time, just kind of watching it, still took time code notes. I haven't really honestly thought about it in terms of what he was doing in each scene and how that was leading to the next scene. So I'm probably gonna have to play catch up there, but I'm curious what you guys think. Bruce, what's your relationship with Eyes Wide Shut?
Yeah, so this is probably the third or fourth time I've watched it. I'm pretty sure I saw it in the theater in 1999. My recollection is I wasn't a huge fan of it at that point, and I thought that the cult stuff was just kind of cheesy. But I've come to really appreciate it, and I think every time I watch it, I kind of get more and more out of it, and kind of see sort of the depth of it and the complexity of the characters and the things that they're exploring. Also realize that even though it's a very serious movie, I think I'm not sure I'd call it a comedy, but there's actually a lot of funny moments that maybe when you watch it, you don't realize that you're supposed to laugh at them or that they're allowed to be funny, like him flashing his doctor card. I mean,
I
to me,
laughed
that
out
is,
loud at that.
yeah,
It was
I
like
think
the
that's
third
meant to
time he
be
did it.
humorous.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think there's a time where you think like it just seems silly or seems like something Kubrick thought that was the way the world worked. But, I watch it and it does feel like it's a purposeful sort of
Yeah.
funny thing that's happening. Um, but yeah, I do think that there's a lot going on with the character of Bill, and I think what I really like the most is sort of this dreamlike quality of the movie.
Yeah.
How often he's walking these city streets at night, and of course, it is so bizarre because it's a movie set in New York City that's shot in London. Many of the street scenes are shot in a studio, and some of the scenes where he's walking down the street, especially the head-on shots, are against a green screen. And
Oh, I
all
didn't
of
know
I
that.
it,
didn't notice,
yeah, and
honestly.
all of it seems clearly purposeful, like it all just makes everything feel
Slightly off.
a little off. Yeah,
Yeah.
everything just feels a little off. It just doesn't feel quite right. And of course and then at one point, and I was watching this with Christy, and he's walking everywhere and he's taking a cab to the party. And then like the next day, he's driving his Range Rover, and Christy's like, oh, he does have a car,
Yeah. Yeah.
which also makes the whole thing kind of weird. Like he's got a car. Why isn't he ever using it? I mean,
Yeah.
I get that maybe sometimes easier to walk places depending on where he's going in New York, but he walks a lot. And,
Yeah.
I think he says he lives on the Upper East Side or the Upper West Side, but he finds himself in Greenwich Village at the piano bar. And I mean, that's like,
Yeah.
it's like 80 blocks or something or more, I mean, it's a huge walk that he's doing. And so it is all very mysterious. And then even sort of like the cheesiness of the cult scene then almost becomes, I don't want to say it's a dream. I do believe it's reality, but in a way it sort of reflects Bill's sort of version of what some sort of letting loose orgiastic experience might be, So I don't want to say it's a dream,
Yeah.
but it kind of almost maybe reflects his vision of what,
Or like
some
the
kind of
danger of it, right? Like the danger
well,
of
yeah, and it is,
promiscuous sex, right? Like
yeah,
the danger of that. Like this is what happens if you do
yeah,
this. You
yeah, and this
end up in
idea
a cult that'll
of
kill you.
danger and especially this idea of him exploring sex outside of his marriage. and the danger of that, and the multiple ways that he's presented with danger. We'll talk about that, and it's not just the party. There's other things that present dangers to him as well, linked to his decision or struggling with maybe trying to have an affair. And then, of course, the big question that we got to make sure we stay in contact with as we watch this is, why the hell is it set over Christmas? Like, this movie could take place at any time of year, and yet it's set over the holiday, which I think makes it also really fascinating. So I do really like the movie a lot, and every time I watch it, it grows on me more. So that's kind of my take.
Yeah, I just want to add to like it has, I love the cinematography of it. It feels so saturated too, in a way. I loved how in the night scenes, interiors, like anytime it was night, it was very blue.
Yeah,
very blue.
Unnaturally blue.
Yes,
way past the normal blue tint for moonlight.
Yes. And then there was the amount of red in the movie. There's red everywhere. I wonder if that's even part of. I mean, that could be why it's set at Christmas, so they could justify how much red is in the movie. I don't know. Right. But yeah, no. I mean, it. There's a lot to talk about. And I don't know. I'm glad we chose this movie. I think there's a lot of interesting discussion to be had.
Cool.
Yeah, so let's kind of dive into it. So, again, a lot of these scenes or sequences are pretty long.
Yeah.
And so I kind of really, and I'm sure there's a lot more in between then, but I really put like this first sequence, maybe baby act, first 23 minutes, is like this party. I guess it's Victor. I can't think of his last name.
Ziegler.
Ziegler, yeah. So it's, they're going to this party, and he's a doctor, a lot of wealthy people here at this party, and he doesn't know any of them. And of course, you're getting a little sense of their marriage. Nicole and Tom Cruise character. What's Nicole? Alice is her name, I believe, right?
Alice and Bill, which I think is really interesting too. These are very generic names, an A name and a B name,
Yeah, very generic.
Yeah. They're almost sort of a John and a Jane kind of names. They almost could be anybody in a certain way.
And also, it kind of reminded me a little bit like a Jack and Jill or like Alice in Wonderland kind of thing, kind of fantasy, or kind of,
although it's Bill that goes down the rabbit hole, not Alice, but I do like the comparison.
Yeah. And so anyway, we're kind of getting, a sense of this world ends up, and again, I'm going to kind of be a little broad here, but Nicole Kidman gets swept away by this other older gentleman, and clearly all he's wanting is sex from her. And she's definitely, entertaining him and, playing with him, at least with the idea. Whether she, you get a sense that she really wants to or not is kind of debatable until the next scenes. But at the same time, Tom Cruise is flirting with these two models, I guess he calls them. And then that kind of culminates into Tom Cruise being asked up by Victor to kind of help with an OD case, someone that he was, which we just saw him with his wife earlier, and immediately he's being upstairs in the party with a naked lady, and she's OD'd, and Tom Cruise has to kind of take care of her. Just kind of let's break this all down, and of course we have 2 or 3 little baby storylines happening here at once, but that's really kind of the meat of these first 23 minutes.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that we normally, I mean, even in more art cinema type films, we still often have some sort of inciting incident that, is the thing that breaks the status quo. And I think one of the really interesting things about this movie is it's got like 5 inciting incidents. Almost everything you mentioned is a part of the inciting incident, right? So there's the Hungarian gentleman who is dancing with Nicole Kidman. There's Bill flirting with the models, and both of those spark something in each other. There is the ODing of Mandy, the prostitute. And of course, Mandy is going to come back into the story, and it's the first introduction of dangerous sex, I think. And then, of course, the one thing that you didn't mention in all of that is that Bill also runs into his old med school friend, Nick Nightingale.
Nick.
Played by the director Todd Field, by the way.
That's crazy.
So in a way, all of these things are functioning as inciting incidents. It's not that any one of them, like, you kind of need all of them. If we don't have Nick, then we don't have him getting to the party. If we don't have the ODing, we don't have what happens with Mandy at the party. If we don't have both Bill and Alice clearly flirting with other people and being seen by each other flirting with other people, then we don't get the conversation when they get home that night while they're smoking the weed. All of these things kind of have to happen to lead to the second half of Act One, where they do have that conversation. So it's so fascinating that it just isn't one thing. All of these things are happening. And it is interesting that there's so much packed into that first 23 minutes, so many kind of important things happening to the characters. And some of them are pretty long. I mean, Bill is gone forever and Alice is still dancing with this Hungarian guy. She must have been dancing with him for like 30 minutes or more. They just keep dancing, and in a way she keeps stringing him along. But yeah, everything that's happening at this party, is really fascinating and is all necessary to set up the second part of the act.
That's interesting. I was kind of looking at the conversation that they have as the inciting incident, because it felt like that's what changes the status quo, but you're right though. They're like, there is all this stuff that had to happen in the setup that is directly connected to what happens later.
Well, it is weird because, to me, that whole conversation is a huge extended climax, or maybe specifically once Alice starts telling the story of the naval officer sort of becomes the climax, because that's what makes Bill jealous and sort of pushes him out onto this journey. So you're right. In a way, it does act kind of as an inciting incident. And that relationship between an inciting incident and an Act One climax is always really interesting, because sometimes you do have the Act One climax be the inciting incident, and sometimes the inciting incident sets up a bunch of things that don't really pay off until the climax. So I think you're right in the sense that it's just all connected, right? Yeah. It's really hard to separate any of it out. But you're right. If they don't have that conversation and then the phone rings and he has to go comfort the widow of Lou Nathanson, then again, maybe still none of this happens. So all of these things have to happen, right? To get us there.
One thing I do, and I'm not sure how I feel about this. I know a lot of times we talk about in screenwriting, there's a lot of coincidences, obviously in the first act of the movie that kind of springboard our characters, but it does feel like, every touch point we have here in the first 23 minutes, it's going to weave into a really crazy web of like how Nick plays into Mandy and Victor. It's like like every character you see, it's like, oh, they're going to come back at some point. And it's one of those things too, like where, sometimes you see a movie where you see the bad guy in the first 5 minutes, you're like, oh, that's the bad guy. You don't know when he's going to come back, but he's going to come back at the very end some point. And so it feels kind of like that too, where it's, I don't know, I feel like it might be pushing it a little too much for me, but also it does kind of play into that idea that it's like this kind of dreamscape.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah, to me that almost makes it more dreamlike, is that like he just had a dream and all the people he was just around recently are just incorporated into the dream, right? But you're right. It is, I think you're right. It feels like too much if this wasn't a film trying to do something different, almost, is what I would say,
Although I think there's an interesting counter argument, which is in some ways it's more realistic than a typical inciting incident. I mean, most of the time you're not living your life and then some big thing happens to you that just derails your life and sends it off into another direction. What we get here is this little buildup of just things that happen.
Yeah.
And that's kind of maybe more what our lives are like, like, oh, this thing happened and I met this person, this other thing, and then it all like leads to something. You're right that it almost feels coincidental that all of these characters come back, but also I think that the story does a surprisingly good job of tying in and giving you reason why those things might happen, right? It makes sense why Mandy is at the party. She's clearly a prostitute. Ziegler knows her. Ziegler is clearly in the upper echelon of the cult, so it makes sense that, that she's there. He has hired Nick to his parties and therefore has recommended him to play piano at the parties. it's hard to know when Bill wanders into Nick's bar, whether that's a coincidence. Is he just wandering around and he looks up and he sees the bar? Or is he wandering around and he's like, oh, I'm out late at night. I should go check out Nick's, Nick at the bar. And he goes there purposefully. We don't really know. But there are reasons, why all these things are the way they are. It's not just a complete coincidence that Mandy's at the party, or that I mean at the orgy, or that Nick's at the orgy. There are very plausible reasons why those things happen.
Yeah, and maybe coincidence is not the right word. I guess it just feels kind of like what Daniel's saying, is that you see all these people and they end up being a central player in the story. I do agree in the fact that they do a good job of like explaining things. I think one of my favorite moments is when we're kind of jumping here, but when Victor's talking to Bill around the pool table, and he mentions like, oh, maybe they found a receipt from the costume store inside your jacket, and so they were doing a good job tidying up there, of like giving exposition as well as kind of making it creepy, and like maybe they did this, maybe they did that, when clearly he knows what they did. But anyway, yeah. So it just feels different to me than maybe some other films.
I do want to dig into the conversation for a
Yeah,
moment.
minute 23.
absolutely.
Because I find
we
it
should.
really fascinating. I really wish me and my wife had planned on watching this together, because our schedules were just busy. We ended up not being able to make that work. I really wish I could have watched this. I would have loved her opinion on it. But I find it just a really fascinating discussion about like what's socially acceptable for men versus women in terms of like lust and flirtation, and what we expect of men versus what we expect of women, and if those norms are actually the norm, or is, you know what I mean? It's just again, it's a conversation. Do you know how long that scene is? Did either of you see how long
Yeah,
that
I
scene?
mean, they start getting
14
high
minutes.
at the 23-minute mark, and they get the phone call around the 36-minute mark, and he leaves at 30.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's 14 minutes.
But it doesn't feel, I mean, eventually you realize this is a long scene, but not in a way that like I'm bored. I feel like, in a way that like, oh, this is different. This is interesting. But yeah, Nicole Kidman, a couple times I was like a little overboard for being high, maybe.
Yep.
But overall, I really liked her performance here, and it was a great monologue, basically. And
See, I
I
did
just
like it, actually. I didn't really like her performance,
I
honestly.
did. I liked it, and I liked just even the concept. I loved that, basically she's telling him, I have emotional affairs, or have had an emotional affair to a degree, or like, I've thought about going, like, ditching everything for this random guy, that I don't know. It's just it's fascinating. I love the slow, like how slowly Tom Cruise is like figuring out what she, like, he has this long process of being like, it's fine, whatever, like, to slowly being more bothered by what she's saying, until finally he's where he's at the end. I don't know. I thought it was a really fascinating scene.
Yeah, it is a super fascinating conversation, and the way, especially, that Alice is sort of pushing on his assumptions of gender and sexuality, and also his hypocriticalness, that somehow, well, of course, the Hungarian guy wanted to have sex with her, but he didn't want to have sex with the models. He's too ashamed or embarrassed to admit that. He doesn't feel like that's something that's and of course that becomes a major theme of sort of the internal part of the movie in terms of their marriage, this sort of like veneer that he has to present, that he's an honorable guy and would never think of having sex with these women, even he won't even admit to fantasizing about it or enjoying flirtations with them, right? And then basically says, oh, well, all men want to have sex with women, which puts him in that trap, right? And then he has to deny that he wants to have sex with women.
He says there are exceptions. There are. It's a classic like husband trying to get out of the doghouse moment.
Right.
I liked that.
But it's also, both of them at times are hypocritical. Obviously, he's being hypocritical in sort of saying, oh, well, it doesn't apply to him. But it's not like Alice escapes being hypocritical either, because, she's basically calling him out for the assumption that only men want to have sex. and that women don't have desire and don't want these things. But then she also calls him out for not being jealous. Okay, well, this guy is hitting on me and you're not jealous. And he's like, oh, well, I trust you. We're married. And she like feels like, generally that idea of like a woman saying you should have been jealous is like, I want to feel like you want me, right?
Sure.
And in a way, she's being hypocritical. That is, she's sort of playing into gender stereotypes about women. And I think that's part of what I like is that there's no sort of right or wrong to this conversation. It's not like, oh, Alice is, which we might see more in today's conversations, right? Where Alice is just calling out his sexism and his patriarchal attitudes. They're real human beings, and they each are problematic in the way that they talk about this, right? And then, of course, sort of both in letting her guard down because she's smoking the weed, and I think to punish Bill, she tells the story of the naval officer, right? And really just gets under his skin, and it's like, well, if you weren't jealous before, I'm going to make you jealous now. And here's the story. And of course it works, right? Because the movie then is filled with him imagining, this officer sort of having his way with Alice and her enjoying it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a hard conversation to watch, and just on the meta level, I kept thinking, I read somewhere there like Kubrick made Tom Cruise walk through a door 95 times, like for a specific shot. And I was kind of wondering which door was it. But when they're doing these kind of scenes, also I was kind of like, man, how many times did they do this fucking scene?
Yeah.
Like how many times did he wear them down before they, he got what he wanted?
I will say, because I did a little bit of reading in the giant Stanley Kubrick book, which weirdly enough was written by an old grad student colleague of mine who went to grad school with me, or I went to grad school with him. He did write that the pool room scene at the end between Ziegler and Bill took 7 weeks to shoot.
Jesus.
So,
I mean, yeah, I saw it was like 15 at the time. It was like the Guinness record for longest consecutive shoot. It was like 15 months or something like that. And which is absolutely
especially
bonkers.
for just like what this movie is.
Yeah,
it's not. There's. It's not.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess there is special effects because they're using green screen and stuff like that sometimes, but like it's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it shot for over a year. Yeah, from like
it's
November all the way through the following year into the next January. And apparently, Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman both signed open-ended contracts. That
basically
is
agree. They knew
agreeing
it would be
to
like this.
work on the film until Kubrick said it was done.
Yeah, that's what I read. That he wanted to commit that way. I guess they were just I
guess that's the power of when you're Stanley Kubrick.
Yeah,
people are willing to do that for you. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So yeah, the conversation. I mean, it's a lot of hard stuff here, and of course, seeing I felt for obviously Tom Cruise gets falls to the trap, and then also he is saying things that are just feels very typical for the time period, even typical today in a lot of ways. And he just really wants to not be in that conversation. He wanted to be physical in the moment, and it kind of doesn't work that way for him. And I felt for him by the end of it. I felt for both of them, but by the end of it, I was just like, oh, this hurts. This hurts watching his reaction here, and he's really tearing into him. And of course, it sets him on a really interesting path. So at 37, around the 37-minute mark. He gets a call from a patient who has now passed away, and his daughter, I guess his daughter called him, or one of the helpers called. And so he goes to visit her, kind of paying respects, also gives him an out of the conversation. He kind of has to go. And
it does feel a little weird or old fashioned, maybe rich people do this. Yeah. Maybe they have a personal doctor that would do this for rich people, but it just feels a little bit like that's what happened in the Old West, maybe. But
I think it's a combination of old-fashioned and upper crust. That he feels the need to show up, and he was the guy's personal doctor. But it is an interesting moment. And by the way, just to be clear, I would say that that phone call marks the end of Act 1, and him going to the Nathansons' house, I would say, is the beginning of Act 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
And
so we get another interesting. It's like every conversation Tom Cruise has from here on out is a mix of sexual lust from the other party or from him, and an interesting way of getting there for sure. Go ahead,
well,
Angel.
and it's interesting because he's still processing the conversation with Nicole Kidman, like this whole scene, basically, right?
Yeah.
Like he doesn't really start the journey until after this, right? When he calls, he's flirting with people. He, calls Nicole and says, I'm gonna be out late. I don't know when I'll be back. So like the fact that she throws himself at her, like they really made her seem kind of like cuckoo. Like
A little
she's
bit,
like,
yeah.
I don't even need to see you. I just want to live near you. I'm like, oh man, that's not the kind of not, you don't want to be around that. And they made it feel authentic. Like she really did feel like she was just like in a moment of weakness and just kind of trying to cope. And so it was the thing where I felt sorry for her even in the moment. I didn't feel like, anything like it was any kind of real situation, but it's so interesting the effect it has on Tom Cruise of like, I guess it really makes him interested in, or it's like the combination of that conversation and what happens to her with her really makes him feel, I guess, entitled to a degree to go have sex with someone, right?
She breaks the first physical barrier for him.
Yeah.
So the assumption is that, and my headcanon was that he hasn't cheated on his wife yet.
Yeah.
He's done a lot of flirting, everything else, but he's never like physically cheated on her. And so she kissed him, and it kind of broke that, that first barrier there, the physical touch.
Yeah.
And so, and also it gives a great opportunity later for whenever he starts reaching out to try to consummate something, So
Yeah.
But I would say that this whole act 2 is sort of him trying to figure out whether he is going to pursue this.
Sure.
And you're right, this is the first moment. But then even after he leaves, and sort of the very next thing that happens is he runs into Domino, the prostitute. He does agree to go up to her room. He does seem like he's going to go through with everything. But then, of course, Alice calls him, interrupts him. Even then, he says, I'm going to be out for a while, seemingly implying that he's going to do this thing. But guilt or whatever gets the better of him, and then he chooses not to do it, right? So even, up until the end of Act 2, which we'll talk about in a minute, where he talks to Nick, he's sort of waffling, right? He's back and forth. He's like, should I cheat? Should I not? What should I do about this?
I do think it's interesting that he goes to Domino's like apartment so quickly.
Yeah.
To me, to me, he has cheated at that point. I mean, like he obviously is emotionally there. He just hasn't physically done it yet. So I thought, and granted, that conversation is long enough, like movie wise in the movie universe, where it's like that could be enough to push him there. But I did think it was a little quick. I thought maybe he wanted one more thing after that kiss.
He does get one more thing. He does.
Okay, tell me.
He is walking down the street, and the fraternity bros, seemingly from the hill, start ragging on him about being gay.
Right,
and they all start yelling at him and threatening him, and I don't remember.
Yeah,
the gay thread here is very interesting.
I think it's because like the time we're in now, like it didn't bother. Like it was just kind of like, oh, whatever. Like it was just like, this is back then that would have meant more. So, to like someone calling me gay back then would maybe more of an insult than it is now. Does it make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, clearly the idea is that his masculinity is being questioned.
Sure.
In his own mind, I think that's just another thing.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're a straight, vigorous, sexual man, when a hot prostitute propositions you say yes. You know what I mean? Like,
sure. Yeah, I guess
it's very much a part of his mindset, because that happens literally right before he runs into her. Like he sort of escapes those guys, and then he's crossing the street, and she joins up with him. So I do think we have two things that motivate him. And then of course, she inviting him in becomes the third motivation, right? He's not seeking it. She's literally like, Here
Throwing
I
himself at
am.
him. Yeah.
I'm beautiful. Come into my apartment, which is right here, right?
Right.
Red
And a
door, by
red
the
door.
way. Yeah.
Yes, all the red.
Come on in.
Christmas.
Yeah.
So the LGBT plus like threads here, this moment, and then the moment where he's talking with the hotel clerk. Very interesting. And I just honestly I was at a loss for exactly what those moments were trying. Like, of course, it's questioning his masculinity, but it because of the scene later with the clerk with the desk clerk, it almost feels like there's more to what that part of it. But it just
I think
it
the desk
felt
clerk
so
is a
random.
different thing. Yeah, I
Okay,
think it
okay.
is a different thing for sure.
Okay.
But here, I think it's pure just young men, it would have been too on the nose to have them be military guys, but you could imagine connection between these frat seeming guys and him imagine, military guys and
Oh, naval. Yeah.
and just the whole thing pushing him towards, okay, I think I'm going to do this, right? And then so he accepts the invitation to go into Domino's apartment. And of course, it's all very awkward because he's never done this before, and he's trying to be suave Tom Cruise, it's all just a little weird, and she's like, "What do you want?" And he's like, "What do you recommend?" Like they're on a restaurant. And
What's
again,
the-
it's
what's on the
funny,
menu?
right? It's funny. Yeah, what's on the menu? He doesn't even know what's on the menu, right? Yeah.
Um, Question, Bruce. And this is a sidebar, not could be totally wrong. Did we ever
Yeah.
talk about like, do we ever do any acting or directing with any scenes from Eyes Wide Shut? Like,
No, we
did we?
didn't.
We
Yeah.
did not. Okay, I
Yeah.
felt like watching some of these scenes. Like, did we do some of these dialogue? I couldn't remember. Okay, so going into obviously talk with Domino. You're right, the awkwardness there, and it really feels like he is just going to 100% go through with it here. And there's kind of a little sweat or a little change there whenever Nicole Kidman calls him and asks him how long he's going to be. And a change in terms of he's going to stay out late, but like you said, but he's not going to go through with it with Domino. But there's a little, and it gets called back here later with the next prostitute the next day, I guess. But he does give her the money anyway.
Right.
To kind of signify that he's a good guy.
Right. In the world of prostitutes.
In the world of
Right,
prostitutes,
right,
make
yeah.
sure you're a good guy.
He is such a nice guy in this movie, kind of like in that way of like just kind of feels
Yeah.
like he's always trying to present himself as like pure motivations and
I would say,
I-
I would say polite more than nice.
sure.
He's
Yeah.
always sort of doing what he thinks is sort of the polite
Sure.
way to behave, including paying the prostitute for her time.
I did have a funny note here. I put only $150. That's what I put.
Yeah, good price, right?
That's what I thought. I was like, oh, that's pretty good. So anyway,
1999,
Yeah.
but still,
I guess
yeah.
so.
Less
yeah, we-
inflation. Yeah.
we got to account for inflation. So yeah, around the 5150 mark. I don't know what I have here. I guess I have. I guess does he go back to the house or he goes to Nick. Nick's at 55. I don't really know what happens between.
Yeah,
I guess that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
50,
Nick.
51 minutes, he agrees to sleep with her. Alice calls him around the
Okay.
52-minute mark. At the 54-minute mark, he decides to leave. And by the 55-minute mark, he has found the cafe where Nick is playing, right?
That's right. 55.
And so then the next 5 or 6 minutes are him, obviously showing up late, ordering his drink, Nick coming over, and our conversation.
There is something I wanted to just mention that I noticed in this film, just as a running theme. The first part is that it's such a sometimes slow movie in the way characters are react. I mean, like sometimes you'll just have a shot and they're just turning their head so slowly or like reacting to something so slowly that it gives. I think that also adds to the dreamlike nature. But also something with Tom Cruise is like the amount of times a character says something to him and then he immediately repeats like the last thing they said back to him.
Yeah.
It happens like 4 or 5 times that it feels like on purpose to a degree.
Yeah.
There's things like that the movie is kind of constantly doing that are just like, it always feels like it's up to something almost. Like it always feels like it's adding in a new element or taking a surprise turn here or there. I don't know.
It does feel kind of Tom Cruise-y though to me. Like I feel like in some of his 80s, late 80s movies, he kind of does that. Or maybe it's like an 80s, 90s writing thing. But it feels normal to me, I guess.
Mm.
Well, I noticed that last night, but I was like,
Like it just
that
feels like that's
feels
how movies used to be,
well,
almost.
that just feels like that's like almost a mix of that and it's kind of his cadence. Like I remember like
Mm.
watching Top Gun, I remember him like repeating the romantic interest line a lot. Like
Mm.
I don't know, and it gives him yeah, there's something interesting there for sure.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll admit I didn't notice it, but I think it certainly plays into Tom Cruise's character and the way Bill is and the way he sort of flashes that Tom Cruise smile and, repeating the last thing someone says as a way to sort of acknowledge that you've
Mm.
heard them and that
Mm.
you are
Yeah.
Yeah.
responding to it. And that again, that plays into, the charisma, that he flashes. And of course we see it throughout the movie, but I think we really see it in his conversation with Nick. And when he's like, you don't think I'm going to let you leave without telling me the address, and he just flashes those pearly whites,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
almost like
Yeah.
there's nothing Nick can do about it.
Yeah.
And in a way, that charisma and that ability, I mean, it's Tom Cruise. He's also a white guy, but he gets whatever he wants from whoever he wants, right? I mean, women, men, straight men, gay men, everybody gives him what he wants. There's never a point until I suppose the orgy and the cult, yeah, that he's not getting what he wants. I mean, whether it's the costume shop, whether it's Nick, whether it's
Yeah.
Alan Cummings as the hotel clerk, giving him information about Nick leaving. Everybody's giving him what he wants. Even if he doesn't flash his doctor's card, I suspect, the people at the hospital would have let him go see, given him the information about Mandy and let him go into
Yeah.
the
Right.
morgue,
Right.
So
Right.
absolutely that is there.
Yeah, and so when he gets the address, he gets the password, and of course Nick says to him that, well, it don't matter if you have all that or not because you don't have a costume.
Yeah.
And so that leads us to the hour and 2 minute mark where he will go to the costume, the rainbow costume shop where it
Yeah.
sells tuxedos and then costumes.
Yeah.
And then
Such an interesting sequence.
And I would also say we're in
Yeah.
Act 3 now, right? So the end of Act 2 is very much where you're going to get a costume, and now Act 3 is going to be all about this costume ball cult orgy,
Yeah.
whatever thing is going to happen.
Geez, this season I have like I didn't do it, but I can already tell, so I have like at least six, like 5 or 6 acts easy because it's
I
only
would
an
say
hour in.
5. I've got 5 acts, and I would say
Okay.
this is the beginning of our third act.
Okay.
Yeah, Bill
So
shows
yeah,
up at the costume shop. Yeah.
Yep. And the guy who runs it is the guy that Bruce Wayne gave his coat to in Batman Begins. Let's just let you know.
I
So he went
recognize.
from
Yep. That I see it.
costume shop to homeless man after
Yeah.
this movie. So anyway, yeah, so we what an interesting, obviously exchange again. Probably one of the only characters who doesn't want sex from him. But he does, offer sex later.
The
But
whole
anyway,
thing with the daughter is just like, again, it's
who
one of
is
those
the
things where I'm
actress
like,
is
I'm
so
trying to
familiar
make
with.
sense of like what are we doing here a little bit? Like it's like that thing. I'm like, it's obviously like it's gross, especially like how it turns out where he's like
Right.
fine with it later, basically because they're paying him essentially.
Yeah.
And then there's that weird part where she is hiding behind him,
Right.
and they kind of share this like flirtatious smile. Yeah, it's just
It's a fascinating scene. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. To
It's
answer
awesome. That's
Donovan's
crazy.
question, the actress is Lily Sobieski.
Was she Helen Hunt's like original, like the younger version of Helen Hunt and Twister? That's my brain telling me that, but I can't remember.
It's
But
possible.
the opening scene of Twister, I think that's Helen Hunt's character.
She I think she had a brief time in the 90s.
Okay.
I don't know what she's up to now.
She looks
She
familiar.
was in some major movies. But yeah, that whole thing. I mean, we have the Japanese guys. They seem to be cross-dressed.
well,
One's wearing a wig, a woman's wig.
yes,
Seems.
yes.
So we get a little bit, and they're wearing some makeup as well.
Yes.
So really, the movie is just, in some ways, it's just throwing like every possible twist and turn and version of sexuality at him
Yeah.
as he goes, and that's yeah. And the scene is funny again. I mean, it's disturbingly
humor.
funny because it
Yeah,
involves
yeah.
a teenager.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, did you hear that noise? You know, and they go back in this room and there's
Yeah.
all food and the two guys are hiding behind these clothes. And I mean, the whole setup is funny, you know.
It's almost sitcom-y. Like you could imagine a laugh track behind this scene.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then she goes, like you said, and runs behind Tom Cruise as if she's super innocent. Yeah, we get all of this stuff happening, and then he's just in the middle of it, trying to rent his tuxedo. And again, even though it's funny, we're also seeing all these shades of sexuality. Again, in this case, this is the darkness, right? This is sort of the underground of sexuality that we're seeing. And then, of course, we're going to pay that off later with, the dad seemingly perfectly fine prostituting his own daughter. And again, all these variations of what sex can mean. And mostly, obviously, we see the darker sides of sex. I don't really think.
Well, it's in all these scenarios, women are kind of objects for pleasure, right? Like a prostitute, another pedophile prostitute. I mean, the women in the cult scene, we'll get to that, are very much seem like just there to be used.
Yeah. Well, and this is all foreshadowed by Mandy overdosing 10 minutes into the beginning of the movie, and obviously she's a prostitute. Obviously we know what's up. And that I just think, overhangs the movie, even though we do have sexuality between Alice and Bill. And they do have sex actually before they get high.
Right.
That Alice kind of looks a little bored, but at least, is positive straight, but otherwise, we're just seeing all these variations of the negativity of sex, at least from Bill's perspective, right? Because we are aligned with Bill through all of this, and we're seeing all the negativity that can be associated with it. But yeah, he gets his costume. And then in another wonderful moment of humor, he takes a taxi cab all the way out. I don't even know where he's gone, Long Island, somewhere, where there are mansions, to go to the cult party.
Yeah, I have this at the hour and 8 minute mark, but yeah, I mean it's fascinating in the sense that I think I was pretty wrapped up in the song part of it, in the beginning of it, like something about the actual tempo and like what they were saying.
Yeah, it sounded like it almost sounded like a reversed, like someone said something and then they reversed it and put it.
I was watching it and I was watching it right here actually on my computer, and I was actually for a brief period kind of mesmerized, hypnotized by it. Just by the cadence and like what they were. I was really trying to figure out what they were saying. At a certain point, I was just really like, man, I was kind of wrapped up in it for a second, but it's interesting because it's like this really cult heavy, at least appearance of a sex orgy, right? And they're not doing anything, at least by today's standards, that's crazy. But it's just, more in your face in terms of, I guess, 1999, you're having Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise starting this, big movie that's releasing in theaters. So it's a big deal for them. But it felt very, I mean, obviously my thoughts were there's a lot of probably powerful people, politicians, other doctors, people, that are holding some sort of higher office, and that they didn't want their identity shown. But also there's just the kink behind it too. I mean, there's the idea of wearing a mask and becoming somebody else and being free from that prospect of it all.
It's also so 90s in the like dissatisfaction with the American dream that is so 90s, right? That like all of these people are shown in like they're married, they're rich, they have children, they have families, they seemingly have everything you're supposed to have to be happy, and yet
what's the next thing?
Need this or you know what I mean, like need heroin and a prostitute in your office, you know what I mean? Like it is interesting. And then even, I mean, Tom Cruise, I mean, like you're literally married to Nicole Kidman, you know what I mean? Like you're married to what is considered one of the most beautiful people in the world.
Yeah.
And like, you're going through this, like you're considering sleeping with a prostitute.
Yeah,
it's just, it's interesting.
Yeah.
2 points though. The first of all is it's not clear how much of his desire to sleep with someone else has to do with his dissatisfaction with Nicole Kidman,
Sure,
and how much it has to do with him feeling like, well, if that's the way she is, then I have to be
Yeah.
that way too. Also want to point out this movie came out in 1999, and
Yeah.
in a lot of ways that's considered the greatest year of movies in a really, really long time. American Beauty came out that year, and Fight Club came out that year. Matrix
Beauty.
also came out that year.
Wow.
Damn.
I think The Sixth Sense might have come out that year, but
Star Wars Episode 1.
but
98,
the
right?
thing in particular, I think, to tie in with American Beauty and Fight Club is we do have broadly similar themes, more about society, right? About
Yeah.
these people being dissatisfied with society and their inability to kind of express it in healthy, normal ways, whether it's Fight Club blowing things up, or it's American Beauty, just, the extremities of quitting your job and then murder at the end, or whether it's going to a secret cult, I mean, we see in all these movies, people unsatisfied and unable to find a way to talk through it, right? And then having to go to these different extremes.
Yeah, sidebar. I have to watch American Beauty like once a year. It's a perfect film. Like I love that movie so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I love the mask that he chose, or I guess I'd say like Kubrick chose.
Yeah.
And I kept thinking, I was like, when this movie ends, I'm going to go buy that mask.
The
and have it
bottom
at my
part of
house.
it, the way they lit it or whatever, it just looked almost like real skin.
Yeah, because it almost looks like it ends here, and that this is.
Yeah.
But then you see the eyes
like
that are
gold tint, but yeah.
I was going to ask, what did you guys think about his expression? Because obviously we have a lot of different expressions happening. And like even of note, like when there's that prostitute that's helping him, like which also I guess was voiced by Kate Blanchett, which people didn't know about till 2019, I guess. But what did you think about like the person walking up to her was I can't remember, but it's like the signifier for either I think doctor or death,
The
or
mask.
whatever. Yeah, the mask he was wearing was for doctor. I think it was for a doctor. And so anyway,
Are you talking about the one with the big nose?
the big nose. I think it's
Yeah,
for a
that was a
doctor.
plague doctor.
Yeah, exactly. Those were
Yeah.
plague workers who
Right. Yeah.
all the
Yeah.
bodies away and stuff like
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
I got close. I said doctor and death. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Plague doctor. It's pretty close. So anyway,
I didn't notice I noticed the masks were creepy. I didn't
they
pay
mean
too
something.
much close to like each
Stanley
individual one.
Kubrick. He definitely picked that particular one for Tom Cruise for a reason.
Yeah.
That's
I'm sure.
What's your guys' thoughts on it?
I'm sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
But you're
to
right.
me, it's
Some of the other
uncanniness of it.
Yeah,
It's
some
like
of the other
scary.
masks are like abstract art. They almost look like
Yeah.
Picasso styled masks and stuff like that. Obviously there is a wide range there. I don't know what we make of that, But to me, what's fascinating during this time is Mandy showing up, with the big black fan on her head, warning Bill multiple times that he needs to leave, right? That this place is dangerous for him. And I find it fascinating on a number of levels. One, it is Mandy. It is the girl that I mean, he didn't really do anything to save her life at the beginning, but he was there for her, and she seems to feel like she owes him. How she knows it's him is always a little bit of a mystery. Does she just recognize him? Does she recognize his eyes? Is it possible that Ziegler actually knew he was there and told her to go try to help?
Yeah, that was my impression.
I think all of that is fascinating. But one, he keeps ignoring her. And two, she makes this agreement to sacrifice herself for him, right? In whatever ritual, that they don't ever quite explain. We don't, does this mean death or something else? We don't know.
Well, it's implied in the pool room conversation that it's all innocuous.
Yeah,
right?
but can we trust Ziegler? I mean,
Sure.
how much truth is Ziegler telling us? And there's reasons, just to jump ahead, there's reasons to agree or disagree with him, right? There's no reason to believe he's telling the truth about half of this stuff, right? On the other hand, because he's just trying to make Bill feel like everything is fine and that there's nothing to worry about. On the other hand, there really was no reason for them to kill the prostitute. I mean, maybe the rule, maybe they really do play by these arcane rules, and she substituted for him, and she has to die. But she already knows about the orgy. I mean, there's no danger that she's going to tell.
And
I think
we've already established that she's OD'd before. And
Yeah.
it makes sense that she would do that again.
that she could have. Yeah, so it is very ambiguous at the end whether he's lying about what happened to Mandy or not. And the same is true with Nick. I actually believe him about Nick. They don't need too many deaths, right? And it makes perfect sense that they just took Nick and put him on a plane and sent him back to Seattle. That I buy that completely. But
They
yeah,
definitely roughed him up beforehand, though.
yes, they did. They did.
Yeah.
But everything with Mandy is really fascinating. And again, I think you get to sort of this dreamlike state, and you get to this sense of what is Bill experiencing in terms of what this is telling him about sex. He is in this place where everyone is having sex to their heart's desire and basically seems to be able to do whatever they want. But he, in particular, is constantly being warned he doesn't belong there. This isn't for you, And part of that, of course, is the idea of the cult. But I think it's pretty easy to read the subtext, which is, this is not who you are. You are not a person who just goes and cheats and sleeps around and does this kind of thing. You're not cut out for that, and you need to leave, because this is like an existential threat. This is a threat to your soul, It's not just a threat to you as a person. And it's really interesting the way all of that plays out.
It is.
Yeah. I mean, it's super interesting, and I think I have more to say about it when we get towards the end here, towards the pool table stuff. But yeah, the end of the orgy happens at the hour and 20-minute mark, I believe. And then we have, I put here, and you might have to decipher this, Nicole, diner, hotel, and then the rainbow costume. So we're kind of hitting various different places here, right? So I think he talks to either he goes back to the house.
Well, before you get there, real quickly, I just wanted to mention again another moment of humor before he is judged, when they walk up to him and say, "Are you the man with the taxi waiting?"
Yeah.
And he's like, "Well, he's out front and he would like to talk to you." Just, again, is so funny, in comparison again to everyone else there. And it's so funny because it's not like Bill isn't rich. Bill is just not at the same level, and he's not really thinking straight, right? So
it's a little embarrassing, honestly. I mean, it's like
it is
like someone,
embarrassing.
is your Subaru parked? Is your the Subaru going off outside right now? Yeah, so it's like it is embarrassing, and what's amazing though that like it feels like they immediately know when he gets there that, and obviously they did go through his coat pocket, but there's an eye on him, right? Because the butler finds him, Spandy finds him.
Well, somebody looks at him from the balcony, like in the first moment he walks in the room.
Well,
everything is suspicious about his arrival.
But why do they let him? Why do they let him explore so much though? What's the incentive there?
I think they just want to know who he is, and maybe they can't quite be sure because he does have the password. And as Ziegler tells us at the end, that was a ruse, even at when they test him at the end and say, "What is the house password?" There is no house password.
I knew it though. I was like, "Don't say
I knew it too.
Say there is no password, dude. Say it." Yeah,
that's what he should have said. There is no password, because that would have been better. Either has the wrong password or not. There's no way he can know it. So he should have said there is no password. But of course, he's too scared and freaked out.
Yeah,
understands why he doesn't say it. He says he forgot it. I just love the way he delivers the password, because he has to say it 3 or 4 times. And he doesn't just say Fidelio. He gives it the whole like Italian flourish. He's like, Fidelio. And it's just like that he belongs, that he says it that way. It's just such a little thing, but it's so great. Okay, now, so to me, end of Act 3, he's freed and let go. And now Act 4, he goes back home.
Right. Is this where
beginning of Act 4, he goes back home? Yeah.
I wrote down Nicole. I can't remember what happens here. Does he talk to Nicole?
This is the big dream. This is, and this.
Where it feels like it's reflective of his actual plot in the movie. It feels
Yeah.
mirrored of what he just experienced.
There's so many interesting things happening here. First of all, it feels like he probably should have or would have given up on this whole cheating on her after the orgy. But then he goes and she tells this dream, and he kind of pushes her to tell the dream, but he tells the whole dream. And by the way, when he comes in, she's laughing at the dream. She's laughing in the dream, right?
Yeah.
And she wakes up and she claims
it was a nightmare.
that she's embarrassed of the dream, but her laughing in the dream seems to indicate otherwise.
Yes.
And it's interesting because whereas before she wasn't afraid to talk about her dreams of infidelity when she was high, now she's sober, and it seems like she is back afraid to sort of reveal the dream in a very straightforward way. But you're right, the dream both has her having sex with a naval officer, having sex with bunches of other men, humiliating Bill, all of these things, and she's crying like it's really terrible. But and maybe she is upset that she was trying to humiliate Bill, but she's definitely not crying about the fact that she was having sex with a bunch of men. I mean, to me, that's more a put on for Bill.
There was a moment where I wondered, is she going to be at the orgy? Is it going to be revealed she was one of the women? You know, just because, you know, I don't know. Like even if she was like hypnotized or something, you know. Anyway, that's the thing with this movie is like I was always like, what is this movie? Is it a thriller? Is it a drama?
Yeah, it has elements of a lot of things.
And like, so I was always kind of questioning where are they going to go with this cult thing? Is it gonna like, you know, especially when he's like caught and it's like an hour left or more than an hour left of the movie, I'm like, okay, so where's this gonna? Is this gonna be Tom Cruise versus the cult? Like, is that what we're going? Yeah. So and I think even at that point, I'm like, so she has a dream about getting fucked by people, and he was just at a cult orgy. So maybe she's being like drugged and used. I was just like,
you don't know. Yeah, you don't know. And what becomes interesting is that once he hears about that dream, suddenly he's all horny again, and the rest of the act. Now the act is interesting because he does go try to track down Nick. So we do get a little bit of the beginning of him trying to understand the cult and get more information about the cult,
which I assumed meant he wanted to be like an official member, like he was seeking
or something.
He wanted to join next time, actually be in it or something.
But then after that, and then he goes to like you said, Donovan, he goes to the Rainbow costume shop.
He goes to the diner, then he goes to the hotel.
Right.
That's where we have the more information about Nick. And we have, I can't think of his name, but he's been in a lot of stuff. He's a good actor.
Yeah, Alan Cummings.
Alan Cummings, yeah.
Who among many characters was what's his name from the original X-Men movie?
Nightcrawler. Yeah.
Nightcrawler, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But he's been in a ton of great movies. Fantastic British actor.
Like Spy Kids, Son of the Mask. Yeah.
I was gonna say
those were not the movies I would have thought of. But
I know.
I would have mentioned Spy Kids, but not Son of the Mask.
But it's interesting because again, to come back to his clear his gayness and playing up being gay in terms of like almost hitting on Bill, but also like the fact that Bill is
oblivious,
so hot in a sense is why he seems willing to tell Bill everything that he saw that night. You know, it's like a chance to just sort of flirt and be around the hot guy for 5 minutes, and he's just going to enjoy it and tell what he saw, and he doesn't care. And then you know, off goes Bill.
It's a great thing because we're on him like the whole time. Like it's like almost like a oneer just on him, and you really do see this range of like he's really trying to send signals, and then once he realized there's just no reception, he kind of gets down, but then he just starts to enjoy the moment. Like he just fine, I'll just enjoy how beautiful you are. It's a very again, it's like it just kind of comes out of nowhere. You know, again with this movie, it's
well, at least every scene's about sex, or it's about attraction, or it's about what do we do with attraction, or I mean, it's super. It is. They don't let you forget. Let's just say that. So should have been called Eyes Wide Open. So then we have the rainbow costume scene, right? Where we're back with homeless man back from Batman Begins.
Millich, yeah.
Yeah, and so now we A learn that the mask is missing, and then B we learn that he has now come to an agreement with these two gentlemen, and to I guess pay for sex with his daughter, and even offers to Tom Cruise,
Yeah.
I'll help you with any type of service you want, kind of thing. And Tom Cruise, it's interesting because you feel like Tom Cruise at that point, I was like, is he going to like alert the authorities? Is he going to look, you probably should alert the authorities at that point, right? Like, okay, I officially have confirmation that there's, underage prostitution happening here. And so it's really interesting his reaction, and I guess he decides not to do anything with the information.
Yeah, he doesn't. I mean, obviously he doesn't take them up on the offer of sleeping with her.
Well, sure, yeah.
But between sort of everything, he's now like he's back on board the sex train, and so the very next scene he drives back out to the suburbs to find the mansion and to again either try to get some answers, to find out how to become a member, whatever. And again, it's great. It's almost funny that the Rolls Royce comes rolling down, sees him in the camera, and has a pre-typewritten note. I mean, there's almost no way that this note could have been typewritten in the amount of time that he had been there. It's like they were waiting for him.
Well, I guess that's what I got.
They knew he was going to show up. Yeah,
they knew he was going to show up. Yeah, 100%. I mean, obviously, there's the dreamlike quality of it, but there's also like just the practical. Was like, well, they knew this guy was not going to whatever.
Can't say
and also they shouldn't. He's been at this point technically been followed already, because like they should know him that he's looking for Victor, or not Victor, looking for Nick.
Yeah.
So they should have a tail, right?
Right.
So anyway, so that we find out that I can't remember where he calls the patient, the daughter of the patient, but I know we find
Their
out
house, I think.
He goes back to his
prostitute-
office, actually.
Okay,
Oh,
so
yeah, it is. Yeah.
the prostitute then happens first, right? Where he goes to Domino's house and then
No, he goes to the office first.
Okay. So he goes
Because
office
it's the
first.
easiest, it's the thing that he knows to track down easiest. He goes back to his office and he calls Marion. It's like, oh, I know someone who'd have sex with me.
Yeah,
but then Carl answers the phone,
makes him feel guilty.
So then he has to hang up, and then he goes and buys what seems like some sort of dessert, pastry, something for Domino, and then
I was
to her
wondering.
house, right?
Let's carve up right beforehand. So anyway, Domino, she's not there. Turns out she's HIV positive, which is like bullet dodge there.
It's interesting that he doesn't tell her that we didn't have sex, does he? Right? He never
doesn't say
tells.
that.
He doesn't, and it's interesting because he's about to have sex with Sally.
Yeah, and I
he's
get
ready to go. They're both ready to go, but Sally actually has enough. Well, it's interesting because Sally seems ready to go, but I guess if Sally thinks they had sex, then
she
Sally
thinks he's
doesn't have
HIV.
sex with him because she doesn't want to get it.
And you'd think if he told her, no, we didn't. I mean, maybe the assumption is, well, if her roommate does, she probably does too. I don't know.
That was my assumption, was that they both might. Yeah.
And
I honestly didn't think about it in the way Bruce just said it, where she's like, you have HIV positive. I was kind of thinking of like, if my roommate has it, there's a good chance I have it too. Because I assume they're sharing partners, like sharing clients, whatever.
Well, it's super interesting because also if she knows that he was a gentleman, it seems likely that she knows that, yeah, you're right, that he didn't have sex with her. So there's also a possibility that she's actually just like being nice. Like, I don't know if I should tell you this, but this person you were really nice to is HIV positive, and I just wanted
the person you were coming to sleep with, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but it seems like if she has it too, she would have said so, So it is very mysterious exactly why she's telling him. I think there's a lot of possible reasons why she could be telling him. But I think what's important, and again, we got to go back to 1999, is at least for me, that becomes the climax of Act 4, because at that point, he stops pursuing sex outside of his marriage. That seems to be it. He does want to get the truth about everything with the cult, but there isn't a point after this where he tries to pursue sex with anyone anymore. And the HIV thing seems to be the thing that's like, it again, it's almost, I mean, how many warnings can he get that this isn't right for him, that this sort
Yeah.
of open sexuality isn't right for him? He's gotten 2 warnings from Mandy. He's gotten 2 separate warnings from the cult saying, don't come back.
Well,
Now,
he's gonna find a one too when he gets home, right?
yeah,
And he sees the mask on the bedside, which is obviously pretty
yeah,
dangerous implications. This is a very classical thing, but they showed the mask and her, and then you're like you're waiting for Tom Cruise to find the
right,
mask too.
right.
And
Yeah.
I kept thinking like I get it, and it did add something to it, but I was like, I think it may have been more powerful this time to not see the mask first. But I was thinking about it.
Yeah.
But
But
anyway, yeah.
even the universe is giving him. I mean, even the fact that Marion isn't there, even the fact that Domino isn't there, right? It's not just people telling him things that he ought to take as warnings. It's literally the universe is like removing all the possibilities for him to have sex outside of his marriage. It's like, no, this is not for you. This is not the person you are meant to be, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Sure.
so to me, we end the scene, or we end Act 4 with that scene, and now he's back out walking the streets again, sort of contemplating everything, right?
And
Or are
then
we
he
talking
notices the
about
tail.
the tail? Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
Which is very another just it's again, this is where I noticed just the pacing of everything, where it takes its time on every shot. It feels like the movie doesn't feel rushed ever. Like it's never rushing the performance or rushing the cuts even. It just felt like, he's noticing him, and then we'll just stay staring at him, and we'll have like 4 or 5 second shots of just them staring at each other, you know, and you're kind of wondering what's going to happen. And it's good tension, you know what I mean? And I especially like, and he finally walks across just staring at him, and then decides to keep going. But it feels like at that point it's pointless. Like we're both acknowledging we know what's happening here,
right.
you know?
There's also another little joke in there which feels almost too obvious for a Stanley Kubrick movie, but he goes to the newsstand and he buys a
the
copy of
title.
the New York Post, and
Oh,
this
yeah.
giant word,
Yeah.
"Lucky to be alive."
Lucky to be alive. Yeah.
I saw that. Yep.
The
That was
headline of the paper, right?
Yeah.
But again, it's also very clever because, the fact that he's being tailed is what drives him to kind of hide out by the newsstand, and he buys that paper, and then he goes into the coffee shop, and he gets a seat, and he starts thumbing through the paper, and that's where he sees the article that Mandy is dead, and that's what in a way pushes him then more fully, which is weird because there's a goal that did start in the previous act, where he pursued Nick and he went back to the mansion, but we didn't know why, right? Before it was, well, does he just want answers, or does he want to be a member? Now I don't think he wants to be a member. Now he just wants answers. What happened to Nick? What happened to Mandy? Is this thing as dangerous as it seems, right? Because to his evidence, potentially 2 people are dead as a result of his own actions, right? Of him sort of gate crashing this party.
We didn't miss his tearful confession, right? Does that not happen when he finds the mask on the bed, where he tearfully confesses everything?
Yes, but that's much later.
Oh, later. Okay, later. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, because what happens is he goes to
It's after the pool scene.
after which pool scene? Oh,
Pool table.
yeah, that's after the pool scene, exactly. So,
Yeah.
So what happens is he finds out that Mandy is dead, and then he goes to the hospital, and
he tries to flash his doctor.
He claims that he's her doctor, and then he goes into the morgue to look at her body. And at of course, he can't ever know for sure. He knows this is Mandy from 10 minutes into the movie. He still can't know for sure that this is the same girl who saved him at the cult party. Although the long red hair is a pretty good giveaway. But once again, the movie gets a little odd in its slowness because he starts lowering his head down closer, and you're like,
is he gonna kiss her?
I don't think he's gonna have sex with the body because we get a cutaway to the attendant is in the room. But yeah, is he gonna kiss her? Are we gonna have some light form of necrophilia here? but we stop at that, and really, I think what we get is that he is moved, right? That he is actually upset, that he's sort of seeing her as a human being,
Mm.
and um, is really
Is it con
curious.
is it confirmed that Mandy is the girl that helps him at the party?
Yeah, Ziegler does confirm that.
Okay,
But
because
but but
I
we,
was
In the
still
we have
kind
to
of
conversation.
trust
iffy.
him though, right? I mean,
They
like,
didn't seem like the same body to me. I mean, they seemed, but I was like, is this the same person or not? I mean, I didn't know, so
well, the
I
thing
was
is,
curious.
can we trust? We don't know if we can trust Ziegler about any of it, right? Can we trust him that?
That's true. Ziegler
I
could
mean,
have said that in
I don't know
order
what
to
the
have a
advantage
person
of it would be.
well, the advantage is that he can then sort of say, oh, well, she's someone you already know has a history with drugs. And yes, it was
Mm.
her, and she just overdosed. We didn't kill her. But I do believe it's Mandy. I think it makes perfect sense that it's Mandy. To
Mhm.
me, it looks like Mandy.
Well, and it's the only thing that motivates her to save him. Like, why else would this random girl be trying to save him at the
Yes,
party?
yeah, yeah. Now, of course, we don't have to have a motivation, but to me, it all adds up. And as soon as I see her at the party, I'm like, I'm sure that's Mandy.
Doesn't she talk whenever they're the opening act where she's OD? Doesn't she talk to Tom Cruise like a little bit, like say a few
Yeah,
words or no?
yeah, yeah.
Okay, I
She
guess that's
wakes
why it's
up and she
okay.
says she's okay, and and he's like, "You've got to quit taking drugs," and she's like, "I know, I know." So she does clearly see him and make eye contact with him.
Well, see, the thing that's confusing is because I read online that the reason why they recast Kate Blanchett's voice is because the actress who is the at the party, the orgy party, her accent was too thick and she couldn't say words correctly. So they recast her as Kate Blanchett.
Hmm.
So I
Interesting.
feel like it's different actresses or different, I'm saying different, at least different bodies. It may be the same character. I don't know, but that's my implication.
But
Um,
It wouldn't be Kate Blanchett's body, right? I
no,
mean,
no, 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 no. But I'm saying like
so
I
there's
don't
no
think
reason to think that they just
she
didn't redub
well
her
she
lines with Kate Blanchett if that was
but she
the case.
didn't but she did she have an accent when she was talking to Tom Cruise in the beginning of the movie though?
No, and so I am curious about that rumor, and I hadn't heard that rumor, but theoretically it could be true because she is talking very quietly
Hmm.
That's why I was
And
asking.
just
Okay.
saying,
I mean,
not saying
and only
much.
says a couple of words. She just
Yeah.
says things like "I know, I know,"
okay.
but I didn't pick up an accent at that
Mm.
point. So,
Okay.
but I
We'll
am
dive into
curious.
that
I'm going to have
later.
to go back at some point and
Yeah.
listen and see if it sounds like Kate Blanchett.
Yeah. Well, again, the her body again, she's laying down in the beginning, she's standing up, walking around in the orgy, and then she's laying down again in the morgue. It feels like it's just the different body types to me too. Like she feels uh like longer, like taller in the orgy. But I need to look at it. I need to go back and investigate.
I think she's tall in all of them. It's just that in the initial scene, she's in a chair. And so you don't really get the full
Yeah.
length of her legs and, some of those attributes. But anyway, um, as soon as he leaves the morgue, we get, I think, I can't remember what happens. Does he get a phone call or does someone walk up and say, Ziegler wants to see you?
I think he gets a phone call, right?
I think that's right. I think that's right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he gets a
Yeah, it
phone
is a
call.
phone call. You're right. It's
Where
a
does
phone
he
call.
get it from?
He just gets a phone call and says, like, not from Ziegler, but like, yes, yes, I'll be there. Tell him I'll be there in 20 minutes or something like
Yeah,
that.
Is he at
yeah,
home when
yeah.
he receives it, or is he at the office? I can't
I
remember.
thought he was at home with Nicole and he gets it. Um,
Maybe
Well,
so.
I
gosh,
mean,
I don't know. I thought he was either still at the hospital or just walking down the street after he'd left. Someone
I
would have
don't
to
know.
do that
It's
up,
kind of like a dream.
but
I don't even know anymore.
yeah.
I,
Either way, I
I,
don't know that it matters too much.
I honestly stopped taking notes around 2 hours and I guess 24 minutes. I just watched the movie from that point on. But I guess I know we learned that Victor was at the party. We know that he goes up to see Victor. Victor tells him he was at the party. Tells him a lot of different things, right? We kind of get a lot of mysteries solved here. The clientele at the party, he wasn't invited, how they knew about the password, his name in the code.
Another
Um,
funny moment, by the way. Just
yeah,
sort of truly embarrassing Bill,
You're really an amateur. Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, you went to the costume shop to get a costume. Yeah. And so all those kind of things. And um it's weird. It's a really weird thing because it's like he's telling the truth and he's like, well, okay, I'll be straight with you now. And then and he obviously his answers aren't good enough for him in a lot of ways. But yeah, I mean it's I'm curious what you guys think about this scene here.
Yeah, it's fascinating one because it's another super long scene. It's 13 minutes long, which in any other movie you could have accomplished all of that work in less than 5 minutes.
Right.
So they really do draw it out. And just the way the conversation unfolds, it's great. One, because everything that Ziegler says is completely reasonable, yet at the same time, you have no reason to trust what he says. And he also, I noticed, uses weird transitions, like, at the end when he's sort of saying that Mandy just OD'd, like, he like, I forget, he sort of walks away and he like gets to the other end of the pool table and he's like, let's just cut the bullshit. And that makes it sound like, okay, let's drop the pretense. I'm telling you the truth now. And then what he proceeds to say is, she was a prostitute. She was a drug addict. It makes perfect sense that she OD'd. So it's like he's not cutting the bullshit at all. Or he's accusing Bill of being full of bullshit, and that's the bullshit he's cutting. But it's just such an interesting way that he kind of delivers that. And of course, again, to have two directors in this movie, not only Todd Fields, but having Sidney Pollack play a character in the movie as well, I think is fantastic. And just the way that he just sort of cleans the slate, and there's sort of nothing that Bill's going to be able to do about it. Like, this is, these are all the answers. It's not your world. This is over. And, and
did you say 15 days or 15 weeks for this scene?
I think I said 7
15
weeks.
Yeah.
7 weeks. Okay.
7 weeks.
I was not even close to either one.
Yeah.
It don't matter. 7 weeks is absolutely fucking insane for this.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine that they used, take 500 on all this.
Yeah.
And I just, anyway, I can't even fathom. I can't even imagine an actor even agreeing to be in a movie with me if they knew that this one scene would be 15 or 7 weeks. So
I will say though, and this runs counter to what you said about walking through the doorway 95 times. In the same chapter I read, they had snippets of conversations with Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman. And they both seemed to imply that even though it sounded like he was super demanding, that they really didn't find him that way. And that a lot of the time seemed to just be slowness, either slowness for technical reasons or even slowness, like just talking through things a lot and really planning things a lot more than like, we're going to make you say this line 100 times until you've said it just right.
It sounds like they didn't do enough pre-pro, so they got on set and just started figuring stuff out because we didn't make a plan. So
even technically, it's one room.
Yeah,
it's a studio room. It's already,
maybe they rehearsed for 4 weeks and then shot for 3 weeks.
Yeah, I don't know.
I guess.
It is hard. I agree. Even with talking through the whole thing, it's only two characters. How much is there to talk? And it's a relatively straightforward thing that Sidney Pollack has to do.
And it's not like rocket science. Like one thing, or in terms of just like staging, like I was actually a little disappointed in some of the staging of a lot of the scenes. It just felt really simplistic or really like. In these kind of close. There's wide shots, but the camera was close to the characters, but there were wide lenses, and it felt like, and it was just kind of like pans or whatever. And I was just like, it felt very, to me, cheap in a lot of ways. Like I don't know. I expected more. Honestly,
it almost felt voyeuristic, like amateur, like not special filmmakery in a way. But I mean, the film is very voyeuristic in just how it presents nudity and all that kind of stuff.
I'm not saying it's not good. I'm just saying that
I noticed it too. It did feel like purposefully plain almost.
There's relatively few shots that sort of stand out. A lot of times the shots are still kind of the one bravura camera move is when Bill is with the models and the Steadicam kind of leads them through like a big part of the mansion. But other times the cuts are a little weird. When Nicole Kidman is telling her story, there's sort of a straight on shot that's pretty far away. It's like a medium long shot. And then finally it cuts into a close-up after a really long time, but it sort of does the 30-30 rule, it cuts 30 degrees, and it cuts to the side, and it's sort of a not very great shot. And then it goes to a reverse angle of Tom Cruise, which would allow you to then turn around and go into a close-up of Nicole Kidman, but it doesn't. Instead, it returns to the medium long shot, So there really isn't like anything super great there, It's sort of a very like, this is how a student would handle a standard continuity scene.
There was also moments where like you're talking about the 30-30 rule, it felt like it was not 30 degrees off. It felt like they were like a, medium
They
wide or
jumped the
wide
180
shot.
roll several times.
Well, not
I
even jumping the
noticed.
180, and maybe that's separate, but like they would just go in closer for like a closer shot, and it'd be almost too close to the original shot. And it just, to me, I was just like, oh, like it didn't feel good. Some of the cuts didn't feel good, and I was like, oh, and I mean, I guess they're cutting on performance, but I was just like, I would have probably
Yeah.
sacrificed a little performance for a cleaner cut. But
Yeah. Yeah, it does seem a movie that's 100% built around performance, and not
Yeah.
built around sort of, these huge camera moves.
Yeah.
It's very much an actor's movie. It's like lots of monologues, lots of long close-ups, where they get to
Lots
act.
of walking.
Yeah.
Lots of walking.
So we end the scene with Ziegler, and we see that Alice has the mask, like you said. So we build up a little suspense, and then Bill shows up, sees the mask, and then just turns into a blubbering pool of tears, right?
Yeah.
I'll tell you everything. He just immediately, which I think
that felt a
proved
little
that he is
over the
incapable
top.
of
Yeah, the
living
acting
the
there.
kind of life that he has explored over the last 2 days. Yeah.
It also just like, I guess maybe the guilt he was portraying maybe felt just a little much, even for what happened and all. Like I mean, yeah, essentially, almost had an affair several times,
Like 8 times, yeah.
Yeah, I guess, but like, I don't know, maybe that's incorrect, but it just feels like, I don't know, it just felt like he was feeling zero guilt ever about anything, and then all of a sudden he just felt like complete guilt about everything.
I get
I don't
it though.
know.
I think that makes total sense, because whatever it is, whether it's sex or drinking or partying or whatever, like when that drive gets a hold of you, that is your world. You're not thinking about other stuff. You are pursuing this thing, and nothing is, gonna stop that. Except for like when Alice calls, and then he, when he's with Domino, and then he sort of gets interrupted and he can't go through with it. But otherwise, he is gone a lot. And so I think when you're in that tunnel vision, like, I want this thing and I'm going to try to get this thing, everything else doesn't matter. The other thing I'd say about him crying is he literally has had no sleep for the last 2 days.
Fair.
And 3, his life has been threatened, and he has just found out, and I think he doesn't really probably believe the explanation that Mandy OD'd, right? So now
Now that he got the mask, especially, it feels like.
So now he also has the guilt of the fact that someone maybe has died on his behalf. So carrying all of those things and then seeing the mask, I get it. I get that he then falls apart.
Fair. You convinced me.
Yeah. So then we go into the, I guess, final scene of the movie where they're going to go shopping. We're back to innocence, which to me, this is why Christmas is involved, is like Christmas represents like Christianity and rebirth,
Purity,
and a pretty stark contrast to some of the things he's been dealing with throughout the movie. And so,
it's also just a family time. Christmas is like, we think of that as like the most, all the families come together. It's all about, wholesome time with your family.
I mean, it's quite a counterpart when you're walking through the New York and you're seeing Christmas trees and we're going to have sex with so-and-so and so-and-so.
Yeah.
So, and then we had this really interesting conversation here, where ultimately, like, probably famously, I don't know this, I'm assuming famously, it ends with, I know the thing we have to do the most, after all said and done today is we have to fuck,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it's interesting that like the movie is like, well, what's the solution? Marital sex. Like it's like I know
I think it
it's
makes a lot
more
of sense.
nuanced than that, and I
knew
agree,
she was going to say it.
and
I
it
knew she
makes
was going to
sense,
say fuck.
and it like I liked it as an ending, but it is like funny that like the movie is about promiscuous sex, all the dangers of it, all of the risks of it, and then it's like, well, how do we fix all this? We have sex in marriage. It just is an interesting.
But
Can't get around
it is
it.
more than that,
It
because
is for sure.
some of the lines that they have ahead of that, she says, I think we should be grateful that we survived our adventures, and that they were, whether they were real or only a dream.
Once he say dreams are not always just dreams, are they?
Yeah. And so,
Which also implies to me like maybe she had like either A, it's like, you know, maybe there's some truth behind even what she was doing,
Well,
that
I
not
think it
just all
implied
dreams.
she had an emotional affair and maybe has had more than one.
Well, I was saying a
You know,
physical
like,
affair, yeah,
it
beyond
feels
the
like-
emotion.
Yeah.
well, yeah, I think what he's doing is he's feeling, I mean, he's not doing it in a mean way, but there's a sense of like, you went out and did this thing. And he's kind of saying, well, you had these dreams, and these dreams have a reality behind them. They have a true desire behind them.
Right.
And I think the big thing that we get, which is weird because it turns out, I think, to be a happy ending, is like, we have to tell each other these things. If we have these desires, we have to let each other know, because that's what's going to keep our marriage together. We can't hide behind politeness. We can't hide behind veneer. We can't hide behind embarrassment like they do in the early scene, or when she is scared to tell him about the dream scene. We have to be open about these things. And what better place to have that conversation than in a toy store, right?
100%. Yeah.
Which is both funny, but also lends it a sense of like sincerity, that, we have to do this. We have to do this for the sake of not only ourselves, but our daughter and our family and our marriage. And if we're going to be together, right? And it's interesting where I wish I'd written down exactly what they said, but she's like, we need to tell the whole truth, that sort of as long as we're going to be together. And he says forever. And she's like, well, I'm not sure I want to say forever. And I think that's a realistic thing of her to say. Let's not commit to forever. That puts a lot of pressure on us. Let's commit to our lives as we're living them now, because that's what we have right now. And then we get that great last line.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's like you said, a happy ending, and I think there's a lot of truth in this last bit here, and I think it unravels a lot of the anxieties of sex. The movie does the anxieties of sex, and also just the pressures behind it, and a lot of people, especially, I mean, it definitely today still, but I would assume even more so 25 years ago. It was a more scarce topic amongst people. I mean, like television has really pushed.
There's more taboo. Yeah.
Yeah, more taboo. And maybe we see the frequency, and the visualization of sex is more prominent today than 25 years ago. I'm not sure. Maybe the healthy conversation of sex between couples is better or worse. I have no evidence on that, but obviously it's a super important topic, and I think I thought Chet did a really interesting job of going into the underbelly of that and getting some interest, at least poking, making you think about a lot of things. And it should. You should be thinking. It's one of the things I feel very lucky in the fact that I've always been very open in this area, talking about it and trying to communicate about it with everybody, friends or family or partners, whatever, just to better understand it and to also start conversations. And so I very interesting movie, and I'm really glad you picked it.
Yeah, I'm glad we watched this. I mean, it is one that like I don't know if or when I'll rewatch it. Maybe if my wife wants to, I'll rewatch it with her. but it is one that I'm like, I'm glad I've seen this. I'm glad it feels unique, in a lot of ways. It feels even unique for Stanley Kubrick's, filmography. And so I'm glad we watched it. I agree. I really enjoyed a lot of the conversation around it. I think it brings up a lot of interesting topics, and I really loved it.
There's a lot to there's a lot of Stanley Kubrick films I still haven't seen. Like I've not seen A Clockwork Orange yet, Bruce. And
No, me either.
I've seen 2001, I've seen The Shining and this. I'm sure I've seen maybe one or two other ones, but it really does show like the type of you know filmography he has, space opera, which is still a thinker, and then you have The Shining, horror film. I think 2001 Space Odyssey is also a horror film in a lot of ways, and so is this film too.
Yeah.
But you
He
can
did Full
definitely
Metal
see
Jacket. He did
Full Metal
Doctor
Jacket.
Strangelove.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
But you see the breadth of themes and topics across his career. It's pretty interesting. Of course, our viewers don't know, our listeners, that he passed away, I think, 6 days after showing a initial cut to to
Wow.
the producers and then Tom Cruise and Nicole. So he never saw the final version. There's been a lot of debate, I guess, and you probably know more than I do, Bruce, about would this have been the version that he had released to the public?
Yeah, I don't know the one thing I do know, comes with, so they were under contract to deliver an R-rated movie. And so you may have noticed, maybe you didn't notice, that there are a couple of times where there is clearly a sex act happening and there is a cloaked figure standing between the camera and that happening. And those cloaked figures were added in digitally. In order to meet the R rating. And the reason they were added digitally is because nobody wanted to cut the movie. Nobody wanted to touch it from a cutting point of view. And so I don't know whether Kubrick was done with the movie or not, but I know that there's an implication that people respected the cut that existed enough that they weren't going to try to cut around those moments. And so instead of cutting them out, they left them in, and then they added this black cloaked figure. I think you see him twice, at least twice, so that you can't see that. And that was their solution to being able to deliver the R rating. So, yeah.
There is a feeling of it. There is a slight feeling of this is a V1 or like that, like maybe some of the extra time in between shots, or like a scene being 13 minutes. Do you wonder if that is the assembly cut? You know what I mean? Let's just put everything in here.
I don't know. To me, it works.
It does.
So I'm not sure he was too far off. I mean, I guess we'd have to investigate that more. The chapter I read didn't talk about that in particular. So I don't know whether he would have made more changes or not.
Yeah, brief research I did was that typically he would be working on the cut up until the last minute for the premiere. And of course, this didn't happen in that way. So there definitely would have been more work done. I think he was quoted saying that there was at least color timing to be done that he hadn't approved of yet, and sound design choices.
Okay.
And also I know that there was that he had this particular cut because he had to show it to Nicole and Tom to get their nudity releases. So like I guess so he had to show them a cut. So it definitely is premature.
Okay.
But how much I don't know. But anyway, it's so fascinating. I agree. I just say it again. I texted Daniel and said, "Holy crap, this thing's 2 hours and 40 minutes long." Like, which means like I start to like configure my night, like what I got to do to get ready for the podcast. And when I was watching it last night, I was like, I'm gonna watch like half of it, and then probably watch the other half in the morning, whatever. And then I just kept going, and eventually I was like, "Oh, I've watched the whole thing," and like it did not feel 2 hours and 40 minutes long.
Yeah.
Like a movie, like here's another movie where like Oppenheimer, where that movie is another 2 hour and 40 minute long movie. And even though it went by fast for me, that movie is cutting like every 5 seconds, or a different scene, or not cutting like every 2 seconds, a different scene every 2 minutes almost for that long. And this felt faster to me than Oppenheimer did. If that tells you anything.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But anyway, I really enjoyed it, Bruce. And again, we could talk all day long about just sex in general. in terms of, I mean, just about what the movie is saying and everything else, but
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is for our viewers and listeners to extrapolate for themselves, and I hope they do get a chance to watch it if they haven't seen it. Daniel, how can listeners write into us?
Listeners, you can write into bit.ly/241mail and let us know what you think of Eyes Wide Shut. Where does it rank in your Kubrick rankings? Excuse me. Cubic rankings. So, don't want that. Let us know. What are your thoughts on the ending? What are your thoughts on Ziegler's explanation? Was he being honest? Is there more to it? Let us know. bit.ly/241mail.
Before I get into the last thing here, Bruce, what is your favorite Stanley Kubrick film? Do you have one?
Oh gosh. I'm sure I'm going to leave something out. Probably Doctor Strangelove and Eyes Wide Shut, just at first question. I haven't watched Full Metal Jacket in a long time. I do like The Shining, but not as much as these two movies. I don't think I've seen Barry Lyndon, so I definitely need to add that to my list. What am I forgetting? Oh, 2001 would probably be in my top three.
Really?
Maybe with
I found it extremely boring in a lot of
these two.
places.
I haven't watched it in a long time, but when I was
Yeah.
in college, I did see it in a theater in 70 millimeters. So
I did too.
That was a lot nicer.
Yeah, so that
Yeah.
just blew
No.
me away.
I
Yeah.
don't think so. I watched it in 2018 on 70 millimeter at the CinemaScope in LA.
Okay.
Well, but in
And-
the 70s, like not
Sure.
having seen visuals like this before.
Yeah.
Sure, back then maybe, but I mean,
Well, that's what he
I
was
was
saying.
just- you saw it back then?
I'm not quite that
I
old.
was like, I was like, I don't think he's that old. I think
You saw it
yeah,
at a
at all.
rescreening later.
I saw it in the early 90s.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Is when I saw it.
Yeah.
But I love Doctor Strangelove. Certainly his funniest movie. I also love that when you think about all of those movies, that I can think of, Kubrick is always tackling big topics. Like you said, even though he jumps from genre to genre. Even The Shining, which maybe seems like his most genre specific movie, I mean, really has to do with questions of identity and family, and mental illness, and then so many of the others do have to do with things like war and the meaning of life and space and sex, and I mean, just these very big issues. And of course, we should also just remind our viewers that Steven Spielberg went on to make the movie AI based on the script and extensive notes of Kubrick. So, there was
I didn't know
another
that.
movie
It's
coming that Spielberg made for him. So
That's really cool.
with the approval, of course, of Kubrick's estate. But
I haven't
That's
seen
awesome.
that thing since it came out. It's been so long,
yeah, I need to watch it again too.
very long.
been a long
Anyway, you can always find us in the bit.ly, as Daniel said below, or the comment section on YouTube, youtube.com/@241studios. It's always the best place to consume all the content. Bruce, thank you so much again for coming on to our Christmas episode. The most,
Perhaps our weirdest Christmas episode yet.
perhaps,
Yeah,
perhaps.
yeah,
I'm looking
yeah.
forward to next year's Christmas
Yeah.
episode.
Yep.
Maybe we can find something even more out there. And how can our listeners find you and all the cool things you do, Bruce?
They can find me at thehutchfiles.com, which is my Substack newsletter and website. You can either just go to it and find my breakdowns of other movies. You can also subscribe to it so that you get an email and get it straight into your inbox. I will try to get one up for this along, I always link to the podcast when it comes out, but I'll also try to have my own sort of slightly more in-depth breakdown. Although with Christmas it might take me a little bit, but I'll try to have that up soon. But that's where you can find my stuff, thehutchfiles.com.
Very, very cool. All right. Again, thank you very much for being on here, Bruce. It's always a pleasure. I had a great time. And I also love the fact that I got to watch a movie that I've always wanted to watch and I've never seen before. And I really did enjoy it overall.
Cool.
So anyway, my name is Donovan Thompson.
I'm Daniel Wingfield.
And I'm Bruce Hutchinson.
And we have spoken.